Recently, there has been much debate over the inclusion of transgender athletes in elite athletic competitions, since the transgender population in the United States and worldwide is increasing every year, and with it, the transgender athletic population. It's important to establish athletic policies that are both inclusive and fair to avoid future conflicts. In this video, environmental and social barriers to transgender athletes participants, as well as biological differences related to athletic performance, are examined. This and more related news coming up. First, let's highlight the barriers to participation. It's important to first address some of the barriers transgender athletes face to participate in sports competitions before examining the current policies behind their participation. A recent study showed that transgender men, TGM, are significantly more likely to participate in team sports than transgender women, TGW, but that this difference is not apparent for individual sports. Transgender women have previously stated that the primary barrier to their participation is the lack of an environment that is both inclusive and comfortable, and this can contribute to their decreased participation in team sports. More specifically, TGW perceive their voices to be a contributing barrier in their lack of participation. Sports that are strongly gendered create an environment for these athletes that make them feel anxious that speaking out or cheering for their teammates could result in them not being identified as women. Similarly, sports clothing may serve as a barrier to participation because it can be physically revealing. For example, a TGW who has not had bottom surgery might use a tucking technique to hide the bulge of the penis and testicles. Sports bras can relatedly impact transgender athletes. TGW might add padding to their bras, and TGM might bind their chests. Any of these actions could be uncomfortable to the athlete and/or hinder performance in sports competitions. Additionally, locker rooms and other team spaces are often strongly segregated by gender, and transgender athletes may be excluded from areas that match their gender identity. Restricting athletes from such areas, regardless of whether they are allowed to participate, may have the effect of causing athletes feeling separated from their teammates and their gender identity invalidated. Acknowledging these barriers to participation is an extra element that should be included in the adoption of new athletic policies regarding transgender athletes. Now, let's talk about biological differences related to athletic performance. The current debate over including transgender athletes in sports competitions in their current state is centered on biological differences, most notably those between transgender and cisgender women. Performing disparities based on assigned sex at birth vary across sports. They're known to be the lowest for swimming and highest for track and field events. These differences in athletic performance don't appear until after puberty and are thought to be most likely due to increased circulating testosterone levels in the male-assigned sex at birth athletes when compared to female-assigned sex at birth athletes. However, there is a general lack of data showing that higher testosterone levels are correlated with improved athletic performance. Despite the lack of evidence, hormone therapies are currently being employed by TGW to suppress their testosterone levels to those more similar to cisgender women to comply with competition regulations. Interestingly, the muscular advantage of TGW over cisgender women is only minimally reduced after testosterone suppression. This suggests that in certain athletic competitions, which rely on muscle mass and explosive strength, TGW will still have physical advantage if they are able to lower their testosterone levels to the official requested threshold. Without scientific evidence that testosterone levels are mainly responsible for athletic performance discrepancies between transgender and cisgender women, TGW could be undergoing unnecessary treatments. More research is needed to show this link before athletic governing bodies can enforce decreased testosterone policies as a requirement for TGW to attend competitions. Well, what about current athletic policies? A fundamental issue regarding the current sports policies on transgender athletes is that the governing bodies of different athletic organizations have very different policies these athletes must follow to be included in sports competitions. In 2019, the International Olympic Committee, IOC, restricted athletes from competing in the female category unless they lowered their natural testosterone levels below 5 nanomole per liter. This level was recently increased in 2021 to 10 nanomole per liter, and the additional requirement of these levels being maintained for at least 12 months prior to competition was added. Unlike the IOC, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA, has much less explicit guidelines on the inclusion of transgender athletes. They only require that TGW must complete at least 1 year of hormonal suppressive therapy to participate on a women's team, but do not require natural testosterone levels to be below a specific level. The NCAA's policies have not been updated since 2011, suggesting that there could be room for improvement based on new and more updated research. As touched upon previously, the center of the debate over the inclusion of transgender athletes in sports competitions is the physical advantages that TGW could have. However, the female category for sports in general is ambiguous and not established in the same manner universally. In order for competitions to remain fair, universal rules need to be created regarding the inclusion or exclusion of transgender transgender athletes. Both the medical and the scientific communities need to provide input to help guide the creation of such rules, especially with hormone therapy expansions, as well as increased research into the link between testosterone levels and increased athletic performance. Finally, what are the proposed solutions? Numerous solutions have been proposed to include transgender athletes in sports competitions while being fair to all athletes. Since numerous nations around the world already allow a third legal gender, some have proposed extending this idea to elite sports as a separate category for athletes who identify as this gender. A problem with this idea is that it still excludes athletes who don't identify as the third legal gender, leaving some athletes without a category in which they can compete. Others suggest employing an algorithm that includes all athletes and divides them into two categories based on both physiological and social parameters. This idea is still relatively new, and more research is needed to determine how inclusive this approach is and how effective it would be to enact. Others suggest reforming sports policies to favor participation based on gender identity and not on biological sex. This solution argues that in general, U.S. policies are on the side of inclusion and that this can readily extend into athletic policies, especially for youth athletes. While there are certainly merits to this argument in terms of inclusion, it is difficult to completely ignore the biological arguments discussed previously. Thus, a solution that balances both inclusivity and fairness is the best approach to this problem in particular. The most important parameters when assessing methods to improve current sports policies are determining how inclusive a policy is to transgender athletes and how fair it is to all athletes involved in competitions. Many suggest adding more categories under which athletes can compete, upholding inclusivity without compromising fairness. However, it is unclear how many categories would need to be added to accomplish this feat if athletic organizations can financially support a large number of athletic categories competing under each sport. For this reason, we suggest adding a third category to elite sports similar to that suggested above, but without the legal third gender requirement. This category would be considered open, meaning that any athlete can compete regardless of their gender identity. Don't you agree? Finally, in other related news, amid protests, Penn swimmer Leah Thomas becomes first known transgender athlete to win Division I national championship. Thomas, who is a transgender woman, touched the wall in 4 minutes, 33.24 seconds in the 500-yard freestyle to become the first known transgender athlete to win a Division I national championship in any sport. Thomas finished 1.75 seconds ahead of second place Emma Wayant, who attends Virginia. Thomas's time was a season best and a little more than 9 seconds off Katie Ledecky's 4-minute 24.06 second record. The race began with the crowd cheering for each of the swimmers, but fans were noticeably quiet for Thomas's introduction. Save Women's Sports founder Beth Stelzer draped a vinyl banner with the organization's phrase over the railing. During the race, Thomas was alternately tested by Olympians Brooke Ford, Stanford, Erica Sullivan, Texas, and Wayant. Thomas led early, but was passed by Sullivan and trailed for most of the first half of the race. Thomas and Wayant went stroke for stroke in the back half of the race, but Thomas pulled away over the final 150 yards to win her first national championship. As she stood on the podium with her trophy, she flashed a peace sign just as she did for her 4 Ivy League championships. And once again, the crowd was noticeably quiet as she was announced as the champion. After posting the nation's top times in the 200 and 500 freestyle events in December at the Zippy Invitational in Akron, Ohio, Thomas garnered national attention. Her success in the pool drew both praise and criticism. Some of that criticism was on full display in Atlanta. Outside of the McCauley Center, dueling protests dominated the morning. More than 20 protesters from Save Women's Sports and Young Women for America, the college branch of Concerned Women for America, chanted outside, protesting Thomas's inclusion in the women's category. I will leave this question out there to the viewers. Do you believe her transgender attributes helped her win the race? Do you believe that it's fair for transgender people to be included in gender-based sports? Comment below. Unfortunately, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Make sure to like and follow for more amazing content. Till next time, cheers!